Hi, I'm Anthony Originello, CEO of the Chartered Professionals in Human Resources for BC and Yukon. We represent more than 8,000 members, and as the organization dedicated to advancing the HR profession through education, advocacy, awareness, professional development, as well as our recognized and impactful CPHR designation, we are proud to be a sponsor of this show. We have been the voice of the HR profession since 1942. Learn more about us at cphrbc.ca.
On this episode of Careers That Matter, I'm joined by Marc Low, who is the lead at Ignition Canada, division of KPMG. Marc, welcome.
Thank you, Stu. Nice to be here.
What does it mean to be the lead at Ignition Canada?
It's very mysterious.
It is.
Yeah. It's, the offering or the group is a place for clients to come and try to demystify and clear some of the noise around things like emerging technologies and the way that those technologies change your competitive dynamics and what is possible for you as an organization. So it's new fuel, new ways to think about how organizations show up in the marketplace. And so Ignition is a place to experience some of that technology, to brainstorm, whiteboard, future cast what is possible, and our teams across Canada help clients in that process. So, is
this a physical space or is it an online space?
It's a physical space. So we've got Ignition centers here in Vancouver and Calgary. We've got a variation coming in Montreal, and we're working on trying to get one landed in Toronto, and that's just in Canada. And then globally, it's plugged in around the world in KPMG. So something like I want to say 26 countries around the KPMG network. Globally, so everywhere from Tokyo to Barcelona to you name it, we've got teams that are doing that type of work, supporting clients in different countries.
So, what are the specific responsibilities of your job?
It's to be plugged into where the technology space is today, where it's likely to be tomorrow, and if you kind of cast out in the future, what's coming down the pipe, what's the stuff that's experimental, but it's getting more and more proven and more real. So that's part of the stories. So
you have to stay on top of all of that stuff.
Yeah, no, a great challenge and lots of fun. It's having conversations with clients about how are they thinking about things like AI and quantum computing and all these technologies that are now kind of converging together as well. And then the last piece is working not just with my team, but with all the teams across KPMG with all these great capabilities. So bringing all that story together for clients. So if a client wants to figure out how to create a new division within their organization, or they want to figure out how to leverage something like AI, that's a conversation that touches a bunch of different capabilities. So part of the job is to bring that great story to clients and then help them make sense of all these ethereal concepts and buzzwords and what's the stuff that's real and what do you do about it.
So that's the stuff that you're offering out to the marketplace and to clients. Yeah. But as lead, you also have to run the center then. Do you have a team?
I do, and the team is growing again, which is great. And so I've got teammates that help facilitate those conversations and bring those experiences to life. And then the actual work a lot of times is internal to KPMG to try to figure out how you find the right skill sets and capabilities. How do you create a cohesive story around what we can do and bring that to clients, and so shape those narratives, and then going and finding those client conversations, engaging those first discussions with clients, piquing their curiosity, and then ultimately shaping that through to an experience that becomes meaningful for them and hopefully commercially valuable for us.
Well, how many people are there on your team that are reporting to you?
I don't think about it quite in the context of reporting in that way, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. The team locally is relatively small. Okay. So that's the core team is 3. Okay.
So you have a very flat structure.
Very, very, very flat. And then they're not formally within Ignition, but very, very close tied to us is a digital twin team, software development team. So that's another 12 or 13 folks, and they do all kinds of amazing things like visualize a port or an airport and then tie AI and analytics into that 3D visualization so you can see the cranes or the planes moving, and they're building the systems that coordinate all these things. So that's that's the team that sits next to me in that industry.
But it's an association. They're not reporting to you.
Correct.
They're okay.
Yeah.
So how much of your time is devoted in a week to doing this? Are you able to work kind of a normal 8 to 5 sort of schedule,
not
or
really,
is that because I see you posting things at 1 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, there is a bit of that. Well, the posting thing is off the side of the desk, right? So that's that's on my own time. But I would say, look, it's a demanding job, but you choose to do it. It's a great opportunity. So there's always more work than there are hours in the day. I probably could do a better job of managing my day, so you jamming more in. But that's sometimes how these days unfold. Is a new opportunity crosses your desk, something needs to be addressed. You got to go and figure out something that wasn't planned for, and still those are all frictions in terms of the day. So the days are long. It's often it's a day at the desk, home to shove some food into my two young boys' face, get them ready for bed, and have some family time together, and hopefully have a chat with my wife, and then often it's back to the desk for another few hours to clear stuff up for the day. But
so it is quite consuming.
That's probably a fair adjective. Yeah, but it's a privilege.
So let's talk about how you got here. Where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school at Collingwood in West Vancouver, so here in Vancouver. I was South African born, but I grew up in Vancouver, so I went to high school there. Undergrad at UBC here in Vancouver.
What did you study?
Political science, international relations.
Oh, I see the connection.
Yeah.
So you go into political science and you wind up at
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a clear golden
So you
thread.
had no idea where you were going.
I had very little. Well, I tell you what I was is I discovered in high school the things that piqued my curiosity, and whether that was a good or a bad sort of education choice, that was the path that I followed. Is where my curiosity took me around. If I look back now, the way that I mapped that thought process was more so that I was interested in how events catalyzed and how history came together. So in high school, it was sort of read to you very much like a chronological textbook of things that happened, right? And then you realize, well, actually, this thing way back here had all these compounding effects, and then something else triggered something else, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was interested in that sort of cause and effect of how history came together. And then very practically how, I was trying to make sense of how the world was shaping, right? And one of the, as I'm dating myself for sure, but, one of the strong memories in my mind was the fall of the Berlin Wall before I knew what the consequence of that was, right? And it's like very formative as a very, very young person, and and then why do they have a wall? What was that about? What was the system that made them put up the fences in the first place, and what were the conditions that caused the collapse of that system, and what came after it, and so on and so forth. So that curiosity about how things worked, I was sort of like the kid who took the toaster apart, except trying to make sense of how the world was constructed and what I was going to do around it. Not directly tied to the work that I do now, but I think just in terms of how my thinking was shaped. That to me is the.
Did you stay in poli-sci?
I did not. Well, if I'm being honest,
did you graduate, or did you wind up changing your focus even while you were at university?
No, I ended up changing my focus. I mean, when I left university, in my 20s, I was, I think, trying to figure out what I wanted to do in the world, and what what made sense. I good friends of mine that were in that same program, went on to lecture at university and became professors and that. I definitely took a different path, and I discovered the technology space in sort of my mid to late 20s. I'd say probably, I'll call them my mid 20s, and that was my first real exposure to fast-moving spaces, people solving interesting problems. It exposed me to, it was the very early days of software as a service, as this new business model kind of evolved, where you used to get shipped a copy of Microsoft Windows, and you would have CDs that you would load in your computer, and all of a sudden it became these on-demand services and so on. So that space was moving very, very quickly, and I got exposed to that, which was amazing. And in that process, once you get into the workforce, if you're lucky, you meet people who capture your attention or have an interesting way of seeing the world or framing problems in the way they thought about it. And that was very much the case for me. And so the leaders that I could see in those organizations, I just was fascinated by how they thought about what's the problem they're trying to solve for, how do they have to structure all their operations. That very much, I didn't know it at the time, but it's very much a sort of where to play, how to win, what capabilities do I need to succeed in that thesis. And I was watching them do that in real time, and I thought that was fascinating. So that sort of set me off on this other course.
Well, so you were lucky enough to be one of those people who got a job. Where did you start?
I started here in Vancouver at a company called Vision Critical. Now it's called Alida, so it's had its own journey. But yeah, just I sort of like could pinch myself now in hindsight of the people that I got exposed to. The technology people who taught me what it meant to think about what a product should do, and then what it takes to actually bring that into the world, and how hard that is. I mean, you couldn't have conceived of the stuff we have today. And then the leaders, Jason Smith is just one archetype of that, but he was the president of Vision Critical at that time. And I can vividly remember walking into his office, and he was one of the first people that I knew at that time that had taken that whiteboard paint, and he'd painted his whole office with that whiteboard paint. And so his whole office was, notes about this is what I'm learning. This is where the market is. These are competitors. These are collaborators that we could go to market with. And just watching him kind of break that down as a to me it felt like going back to competitive sports, and your coach would lay out plays, and that's what I was sort of seeing articulated there, was like, this is the shape of the market, and this is how we're going to win in our chosen path. And I just thought that was like the best thing.
What was your role there?
I was a salesperson, and not particularly good at that, I would say, probably, if we're both being honest. But it was my first exposure to, here's how you take this thing that somebody's built, and here's how you articulate the value proposition, and you map that to the real challenge somebody's having in their job, and how do you make the case that their life's going to be better with this thing that we've built in your life and the work that you do. So I was learning that skill set and that sort of thought process, and subsequently, of course, taking that forward in all kinds of different ways, interesting ways.
So where'd you go from there?
I got introduced to a guy at Vision Critical who had a similar background to me. He was also a South African-born guy who'd grew up in Vancouver, and he'd done his MBA back in South Africa. And he described this fantastic experience of going to the University of Cape Town, and it was so amazing. And and by the way, just it was like top 10 in the Financial Times rankings, because it's incredibly affordable, and the program was great, and I was in a bit of a mood to have a sort of personal pilgrimage. So I packed my life up, and I went to South Africa to do an MBA at the University of Cape Town, which was a interesting kind of left turn. But in that process, I got exposed to a culture that I only kind of knew as a tourist and by family lore. I got exposed to a completely different business operating environment, a whole different set of challenges, a real reality check in terms of how a whole bunch of the world actually lives their day-to-day life. And we complain about the smallest of things here, right? I'm like, grocery stores out of the yogurt that I like or whatever. Meanwhile, there are people that are literally trying to figure out what tomorrow is going to look like. And so it was really sobering in a good way. I think it was a real, it was a growing up effect on me.
And what was your MBA in?
Strategy and marketing. So it was kind of, those two things of, that idea of how do you break down a market and an opportunity and figure out where you can play and succeed, and how do you articulate the value that you bring into that market. So those were the two areas of focus for me. So
was it from there that you then said, I think I'm going to get into this space as an entrepreneur, or was there another stop along the way?
There was another stop along the way. This is, you can never, my dad is fond of saying, you can never plan for the way things are going to really roll out. You can have an idea of where you directly want to go, but so much of life is just chance. In MBA programs, typically there's these different clubs for industries, and Management Consulting Club was one of the clubs. And I actively avoided that club. Ironically enough, I went out of my way to not. I thought that's not the way that I want.
That is ironic.
My trade. And then the woman who led recruiting for Deloitte was very tied to the school, and when I graduated, I'd taken my girlfriend, now wife, and we were touring North America. That was like my present to myself, having kind of gone through this whole story, and I started getting these phone calls and emails from this recruiter saying you have to meet this guy at Deloitte, and I said I don't want to work in management consulting. No, it's not management consulting. You have to meet this guy. I think he'd really be a fit, and of course, the classic unintentionally, the more that you fob it off, right, the more that they want to that they want you on the phone. And I met this guy Tom Yankovic, who was the chief innovation officer for Deloitte in Southern Africa, right, sub-Saharan Africa, and big tall guy. He's 6'2", 6'3", ex-rugby player. One of these magnetic personalities that like fills the room when he enters, right? The analogy that I've subsequently learned is, a thermostat, not a thermometer, right? So he enters the room and you can feel the chemistry change. And he had that dynamism about him that made you want to just run through a brick wall to do the thing that he was articulating. We're gonna go over there, and here's how we're gonna do it. And you would work evenings and weekends to make it happen in support of that vision, which was great, right? And the mandate that he had was to do things that were different and out of the box, and take some of the stuff I was interested in, change the way that Deloitte thought about itself, the way that Deloitte goes to market, and I've kind of got licensed to move fast and break things. Do you want to join me? I was like, classic.
How could I say no?
How can I say no? And so that took me on a whole unexpected journey. I spent 5 years in Johannesburg in South Africa at Deloitte, which was completely unintentional. I was going to go and study and come back to Canada. I had this amazing interlude in the meantime, and then eventually convinced my now wife to come back to Canada with me eventually, and so we came back in the late 2010s, and we've been back in Vancouver ever since.
But you started up your own venture along the way.
I did. We had 2 stops in that space, both borrowing from the stuff that I'd learned at Deloitte. So at Deloitte, we're building flexible talent marketplaces, really. The idea that talent is everywhere. It probably doesn't work for you. And so how do you access that talent that's outside your 4 walls and make yourself smarter and more agile? And lots of analogies to the world that I'm living in today. And so we built 2 businesses in that sort of flexible talent space, online marketplaces and virtual organizations. Made every mistake that an entrepreneur can make.
Like all entrepreneurs.
Learned lots and lots of hard commercial lessons, hard personal lessons, falling out with founders and all kinds of stuff. So it was my second MBA in real business, I think, and taught me a lot, and also made me certainly appreciate where I am now. And after the second foray in entrepreneurship, met the managing partner for KPMG and got along like a house on fire. And 5 years later, here we are. I'm a partner in KPMG, and life is full of surprise and challenge. So,
in describing yourself earlier, you talked about your innate curiosity. Yeah. How important has that been to you in the success that you've enjoyed in your career?
I think it's been everything. I think that curiosity. I was sharing with you before we rolled here. My dad was a civil engineer, and so he was for sure the kid who took the toaster apart and tried to figure out how everything worked. And he brought that sense of curiosity to me, which was like the most amazing gift. Is just to be curious about how did they actually, what's the process of making this mug, right? How does the computer actually work? How is it physically constructed? How does software architected to get to, et cetera, right? All these sorts of things. So when I looked out in the world, I always had that sort of curiosity about how did all this come to be, and get trying to work that backwards to make sense of it, or at least to make sense of it for myself. So that I've taken that into this, whether it was at Deloitte or now at KPMG. innovation and technology, I think, is being very, to be successful there, you've got to be curious about how the world's constructed. You got to be curious about how these new and emerging solutions work and how they map to the world that we have today. And then that's the marketing piece, is there's a big gap between what these technologies can do and how the world as we live in it today is constructed, right? Architected and constructed. And so the marketing piece is to be able to figure out, the map of how do you get from here to there, and to create buy-in and interest from stakeholders to go on that journey, because like the status quo is way easier, right? To just do what we've always done is way easier. So I think it's really informed everything. And the interesting thing about the interesting thing about in a professional context is that I had this engineering father. So I got this great curious mother who was a trailblazer in her own right. So I kind of like the places where I needed courage to leap and take a chance. I feel like I got that there. And also, I was going to use the adjective cynicism. It's not cynicism. It's, I think, a sense of groundedness in don't get enamored by the brochure over here.
Isn't that called critical thinking?
That would be a more elegant or positive way to think. I think that's about right. It's saying technology has a role to play, and these are like more philosophical than technical discussions, right? But technology has a role to play. It has definitely made our lives better in a whole bunch of ways, and it's not the solution to everything. And there's a reason that the whole bunch of the population yearns when they're sitting in the city. They yearn to go into nature, right? There's a human element to how we, I think, live, and recognizing the spectrum of interests and perspectives, and trying to figure out like where's the right place to put technology, and what are the good and the bad things, right? Like what are the thorny pieces of this very cool thing that's being articulated, and not getting lost in that thing, or that negative thing of nothing good is going to come of this, right? It's not it's like a Luddite type of view of technology, of like we were better off when life was simpler, right? It just is. Life just is. We are where we are. We all have phones and we're connected all the time. It just is. Okay, how do we make that a little bit better by looking at all the menu of stuff that's over here,
right,
and then being able to storytell about what that can look like, right? What that journey can look like, and paint a vivid picture about how much and what that future is going to be, and then doing the work to like birth that into reality. That's the fun stuff.
That is the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for giving us insight into your current job and your path to it.
Oh, what a pleasure.